Advantage generation. Advantage generation simply means increasing the disparity of cards between you and your opponent. This means having more cards in your hand or on your board than your opponent has on theirs. Generating advantage usually comes in two forms: plussing yourself or minusing your opponent. Let me explain. Minusing your opponent means reducing the number of cards your opponent has in their hand or on the board. This most commonly will be done when attacking a rearguard and sending it to the drop zone. Retiring an opponent's rearguard is another common way of minusing your opponent, but temporary effects such as Nubatama's Bind or Link Joker's Lock aren't technically minusing since the cards are only gone temporarily. Plussing, on the other hand, refers to the opposite, increasing the number of cards in your hand or on the board. This can mean superior calling, drawing additional cards, or adding specific cards from the deck to the hand via skills. If those skills require you to retire, discard, or otherwise cause you to lose more cards than you gain, then those skills do not count since you have not increased the overall number of cards you have. In general, you need to subtract the amount of cards that were lost from the amount of cards gained to work out how much advantage was generated. For example, let's say we attack with our Binoculars Tiger and use its skill to give Hamasuke plus 4k power. At the end of the turn, Hamasuke is retired due to the effect of Tiger, which in return triggers Hamasuke's skill, letting us search for 2 more of it from the deck and add them to our hand. We have added 2 cards to our hand, but we also lost a card in the exchange when Hamasuke was retired, so 2 minus 1 equals 1. This means we gained plus 1 card advantage. Some clans can superior cool in order to generate advantage, such as Gold Paladin, Pale Moon, Royal Paladin, Shadow Paladin, and Genesis. Spike Brothers can cool cards from the deck, but usually they shuffle rearguards back into the deck in order to make room for replacements, who then often end up back in the deck themselves. This usually results in having the same or less overall cards, and so doesn't count as advantage generation. Angel Feather has Danielle and Kyriel, who can superior cool cards from the damage zone, replacing them with cards from the top of the deck instead of rearguards. Superior cooling to gain advantage is when the card cost for the superior cool is less than the amount of cards superior cooled. The card cost refers to the amount of cards we lose when conducting our superior cool, such as Granblue's Captain Nightmist retiring a rearguard in order to superior cool itself from the drop zone. Since its card cost was 1, and only superior cooled a single unit itself, it did not generate us any advantage. This is known as a 1-for-1, since we paid 1 to gain 1. As an example, let's say we have 4 damage and our Azel's Limit Break is activated. For the cost of 1 counterblast, we're able to look at the top 4 cards of our deck and superior cool a unit. This costs us no cards, but gives us an extra card each time we use the skill. So if we're able to use the skill 4 times in a single turn, we can plus 4, which is a very strong form of advantage generation. This skill can also be used to call over existing units in occupied rearguard circles, which would be considered a 1-for-1, and doesn't generate us any advantage, but it does allow us to potentially replace a unit with an interceptor, or thin out the cards in our deck by superior cooling grade 1 and 2 units over each other in order to have a higher chance to hit a trigger. Generating advantage is important for multiple reasons. Having more cards gives you more options. With more cards in hand, you're able to pick and choose which units you want to ride or call to have the best formation possible, rather than being forced to settle for whatever you currently have. By superior calling additional units, you're able to hold onto the cards in your hand, which can be held onto for a later turn, or simply call over the superior called units if they're inferior to your desired formation. It will also give you access to more defensive options. Drawing more cards gives you a higher chance of having access to interceptors and perfect guards, 2 things that can win you the game. Superior calling at random from skills such as Gold Paladins will give you a chance to call an interceptor. Even better, if you have a skill that lets you pick what you superior call, such as Royal Paladin's Planetal Dragon, you can guarantee to get your hands on an interceptor. Of course, there are downsides to drawing an abundance of cards, such as drawing into triggers, overdrawing, and decking yourself out. Overdrawing is something that can and will happen from time to time, especially if you're running 9 draw triggers and are playing a deck that generates a lot of advantage. This is why some players lean away from draw triggers in decks that already have plenty of advantage generation. Overdrawing is not the end of the world. You don't lose any advantage, only the potential for advantage is lost. You can, however, send a trigger or perfect guard to the drop zone, so it should be avoided whenever possible. Decking yourself can be a real threat depending on the deck you're playing. This can be mitigated somewhat by using skills that return cards back to your deck, such as Gancelot and Chariot. Remember, you lose when you draw your last card, or if your drive check reveals the last 2 cards in your deck. Drawing into triggers feels really bad in Zero. The unit cannot boost, it cannot intercept, and it's one less trigger in the deck to potentially hit. Having an abundance of draw triggers will make it more likely to draw into more triggers, but in general it's better to have access to more cards than to worry about drawing into all of your triggers, with the exception of being dependent on a heal trigger to stay in the game. Consistency. Consistency and advantage generation go hand in hand, as having access to more cards will generally make your deck more consistent. The level of consistency can even go a step further and fix the problems that drawing too many cards can cause, such as drawing into triggers. Trigger fixing. Some clans have access to skills that allow them to put their triggers back into their deck, such as Royal Paladin's Gancelot, Gold Paladin's Gancelot Zenith, and Oracle Think Tank, who have many cards that give them the option to put cards from their hand on the bottom of their deck. Dark Irregulars have 3 different ways to put heal triggers back into the deck. Edel Rose can send herself back from the hand to search for Werewolf Seeger. Chariot can create a copy of itself and shuffle it back into the deck, and the Ammon followers check if they soul charged a heal trigger, and if they did, they create a grade 0 with a heal and shuffle it back into the deck. Great Nature have access to Vocal Chicken, who can be retired to call a grade 2 from the deck, which has good synergy with the clan as a whole, since Great Nature is constantly wanting to retire its rearguards, which means drawing into Vocal Chicken, who could be your heal trigger, can have some uses and not just feel like a completely dead draw. Searching. Searching refers to searching through your deck for cards and adding them to your hand, like the Solitary Gancelot we were talking about before, who can shuffle itself into the deck and search a Blaster Blade to add to your hand. This doesn't provide any card advantage, but it does add a grade 2 with a useful skill to your hand. Oracle Think Tank have access to Goddess of the Sun Amaterasu, who can search the deck for any card and add it to its owner's hand. This effect allows for the player to search for a perfect guard, an interceptor, or whatever else they might need for any given situation. Some of these skills will allow you to thin your deck, removing non-trigger cards, increasing the chances that you hit a trigger during drive checks and damage checks, due to there being less non-triggers in the deck. This won't guarantee you hit triggers, but will put the odds more in your favour. The other type of searching is more restrictive, and that is searching only a small part of your deck, such as Azel's skill to look at the top 4 cards and call one of them. This skill's more useful than simply calling the top card of your deck, since you have more control over the card you call, but less useful than searching your entire deck for any card you want. Deck stacking. Oracle Think Tank are able to influence the cards on the top and bottom of their deck, and if they opt to not use skills to shuffle the deck, they can effectively stack the deck in their favour, or, at the very least, know the order that cards will start appearing in. Cards like Tsukiyomi and Secretary Angel can stack the bottom of the deck, while cards like Battle Sister Coco can stack the top or bottom. Other clans have access to deck stacking effects, but to a much lesser extent, such as Royal Paladins with the Galahad line, which has the same type of stacking skill that Tsukiyomi has, but the clan Royal Paladins lacks the tools to play around the skill effectively, such as lacking draw power, lacking supporting deck stacking skills, and having more access to shuffle effects. Toolboxing. Toolboxing is when you give yourself access to cards that you don't have in your hand or board. This can be effects that search your deck, such as Sanctuary Guards for Royal Paladins, skills that search your drop zone, like Grand Blue, or skills that search your soul, like Pale Moon. Having access to a large pool of cards that can be searched for specific cards allows for a lot of flexibility, as you are able to find the correct tool for the job at any given time, such as an Interceptor, a unit with a powerful on-call skill, or a unit that can hit magic numbers and get extra points of damage in. In conclusion, having access to more cards will not always be a good thing, such as when you draw out all of your triggers or when you search out a heal trigger from the top 5 cards of your deck. But in general, having more cards will give you more options, including both offensive and defensive varieties. Many search effects are able to reduce the number of cards in your deck while leaving the triggers, increasing the likelihood for you to hit them during checks. Thanks for watching.